Hello. So first of all, I'm up here by myself, but I'm going to say we a lot. So I want to let you know who we is. This group of wonderful people is the web committee at Carleton University Library, and I am just pleased as all get out to chair this committee. So I'm going to start today with just a tiny bit of context and then talk about the process that we used when we redesigned our subject guides, and then I'll show you the guide design that we came up with. I should also mention that two of the people on the screen are also in the audience. Yay! So why did our guides need to change? The existing subject guides were built in 2011 before I arrived at Carleton in Drupal as a custom content type. They were based, rather obviously, on the tabbed approach of LibGuides. But unlike LibGuides, the tabs were hard-coded. So you didn't have to use all of the tabs, but you could only choose from this specific set of tabs. And requests for new tabs kept coming in all the time. And it's kind of hard to say no to tab 16 after you've said yes to tab 14 and 15. We knew that they were not mobile friendly. This is, as it says, theoretical subject guide using all of the tabs. No guide actually uses all of the tabs, but a lot of them came close. So not mobile friendly, and increasingly not desktop friendly either. So we knew we needed to do a redesign. And rather than try to just shoehorn all of this existing content into a new format, we thought we'd take a step back and do some user research to see what the user needs were around subject guides. And our group does a lot of user testing, but this ended up being the biggest user research project that we'd done. So our user research with students started with sort of guerrilla style research just in the library lobby. We ended up talking to 11 students over a couple of days. We showed them the existing tabbed guide and a different format used at a different library for their subject guides, and then asked a couple of quick questions just to get a sense of what some of the problems might be and what we needed to explore further. And so we did explore further in in-depth interviews. I interviewed 10 undergraduate students and 7 graduate students. And there were a couple of questions that were specific to subject guides, but we also talked more generally about the research process and how the students got started, what they did when they got stuck, and things like that. And those sort of the bigger answers were actually more useful than the ones that were specifically about subject guides. Also for the grad students, I asked if they were TAs, and if they were, I had some questions about the students that they TA'd and their research processes. So we took all of this, and the big takeaway, I think, is one that is not going to surprise you, which is that students want to find information quickly. But we don't always make that easy. So this is all of the content from one single subject guide. And this is what students find useful in a subject guide. So you've got databases, citation information, and contact information for the subject librarian or subject specialist. It's a tiny amount in a sea of information. And I assumed that staff were making guides like this for students. And that assumption is actually a little bit obnoxious because it comes with this, like, they clearly do not understand users like I understand users, right? But we also did user research with our staff. And I discovered that I didn't actually understand the user needs of our staff. So what did staff say? We started with a survey. I know, survey, but it worked. Just to get sort of a broad, high-level idea of why staff were creating subject guides, who they were creating them for, some of the pain points. And then we had focus groups where we probed this kind of stuff in more depth. And the big takeaway from the research we did with staff is that subject guides are most important to them for their teaching and for helping their colleagues on the reference desk. Students are not the primary audience. Really? So we took everything we'd heard with our user research. We looked at our web analytics because we know that what people say is not always what they do, so we looked at what they were doing with the subject guides as well. And we came up with a set of design criteria for our redesigned guides. But there was still this issue, right, of staff wanting all of the things, preferably on one page, and students just wanting this tiny little bit. We were a little bit tempted, I will admit, to focus exclusively on student needs. But about 14% of use of subject guides comes from staff computers. So they're a significant user group, and we wanted to make sure that the design worked for them as well. In Web Committee, we often talk about trying to make things intuitive for students, but learnable for staff. So student first, definitely, but staff friendly, right? So we thought since the guides seem to have these two very distinct user groups, why not create or look at creating two different kinds of subject guides? It's what we did. We thought we'd try it. Like, we'll do some mock-ups. So that's what we did. We created mock-ups of two different kinds of guides based on our design criteria. The first guide was a quick guide that was aimed at students, and the second was a detailed guide. We were very creative in our naming, and that was aimed primarily at staff. However, in our user testing, we only tested with students. Again, that student-first kind of approach. So we ended up, by the end, we had tested with 17 students. We'd iterated the design 3 or 4 times as we were testing. And once we were pretty happy with what we had, we thought it met students' needs and they could use it, we presented the designs to all staff. And then we met with staff again in small groups to discuss, see how it was all gonna go. But reaction was pretty positive, which I was honestly not expecting. So that was great. And I think one of the reasons for that was that we were very conscious when we made our presentation to include a lot of direct quotations from students. So staff heard in their own words what students were telling us, and they could see that we had made design decisions based on that. And that was important to them because they really care about students. They make those crazy walls of text all over the website because they care and they want to fill any possible need that may ever arise, right? So they appreciated that we also cared. Okay. I clearly don't care about keeping track of where I am. So I was a little surprised, though, that no design changes came out of our consultations with staff. They definitely had lots of questions about how they were going to fit their content within the design, but they didn't really have issues with the design itself. So that was nice. So we were able to build, right after we had those small group meetings, we started building right away, and we built our 2 new content types in Drupal, and we created documentation for staff that had not just the how-tos, but also some best practices based on what we'd heard from students, chock full of all those direct quotations, so they always had that information at hand as they were creating their content. And then we were able to open the guides for editing on June 13th, which was fantastic. It was a little bit ahead of schedule. And that gave staff almost the entire summer to work on their guides. So I'll show you what they look like. So this is our quick guide. This is aimed at students. I described it to staff as something that would be useful for a student who had an assignment due the next day and didn't start until after the reference desk was closed, so they couldn't possibly come to them for help. There are 5 key resources, and only 5. They don't have to use all 5, but they can never put more than 5 resources in this guide. And the reasoning for that, I think, is captured well by this student who said, when you have less information, you focus more on something that you want to find. When you have a lot of information, you start to panic. Which one should I do? This one? Oh, wait, and then you start to forget what you're looking for. So she's just describing information overload, but we have it in her words, which became very compelling for staff, I think, and better than me standing up and saying, beware of information overload, because this is how I talk when I talk to staff. But some students still found this a little bit overwhelming. So we did put a 160 character limit on the annotations to make sure this screen was as clean as possible. We recommend to staff that databases feature prominently in this list. And that's because of what students told us, but also what our web analytics showed, which was that databases are selected 3 times more than any other resource from subject guides. We also recommend not linking to encyclopedias or dictionaries here. In the tabbed version of subject guides, dictionaries and encyclopedias were kind of front and center, and that was not always great for students. So here's one guy like this. Upon seeing this tabbed guide with lots of encyclopedias and dictionaries, if someone was to give this to me, I'd be like, yeah, I see encyclopedias, I see dictionaries, I'm not really interested in doing any of these or looking through this, I'm out of here. So just seeing those things made him want to flee, which is not what you want. So we recommend that. Do I go through and make sure they aren't there? No, but it's a recommendation. And then at the bottom, if the 5 key resources are not enough, there's more information. People can put related subject guides in, general research help, guides, links to those things. And then the link to this second kind of subject guide, which is the detailed guide. This link is not mandatory. People do not have to create a detailed guide. If a quick guide will suffice, that's fantastic. Most people do. The nice thing about this particular aspect of the design was we were able to let staff use this link to go to their existing tabbed guide. We do plan to get rid of those, but we're not going to get rid of them until September 2017. So that decision was partly based around various sabbaticals and things going on. We didn't want to stress anybody out, and allowing people to link to that tabbed guide for a year and have that extra transition time, I think really helped with staff buy-in, because we weren't sort of artificially forcing them to change everything in 2.5 months. Okay, and then the detailed guide looks like this. So it's pretty simple. It's accordions instead of tabs, which, I mean, one aspect of that is that it's more mobile friendly. But another thing that I think is really interesting is that when we did user testing, every single student saw the accordions. When we showed people the tabbed subject guides, not everybody noticed the tabs. And this is a problem that's been documented in some usability studies around LibGuides, is that there is a little bit of tab blindness that happens. So this was nice. This made me happy. We have a default of 5 accordions for the same reason we had the default of 5 key subject or key resources, just to cut down on that information overload. But because the target audience for this guide is not students, but staff, we let them have additional accordions if they need it. However, we wanted there to be a little barrier to filling this page with just accordion after accordion after accordion. So this is what happens I have a little animation. So this is, oh, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. Okay, so this is someone adding a 5th accordion, and then going down to add another one, and the add another item button becomes disabled after you have 5, and so you have to get in touch with us and ask us to create the additional ones. So it is it's a small barrier, but it is a barrier, and it seems to be working. I've had one person ask for additional accordions, so that makes me happy. There's flexibility now in the tab labels, which staff love, and also in the content. So they can put in as much content as they want in each of these sections. They can put in text, images, video, whatever. But we do ask them to please be concise and to take into account that students really don't have a lot of time to be spending on these things. And again, I'll finish with a great quote from a student who said, look, when I come across something, I'll skim through it, and if I don't see anything there that's immediately helpful to me, it's a waste of my time, and I need to go do something else that is actually going to be helpful to me. No patience. So speaking of time, I'd like to leave a little bit for questions, but if you want to get in touch with me later, Twitter, email, grab me at the reception, whatever. Thank you very much for your time.
We do have a few minutes for questions. This is all. Yep. Are there questions? Yes.
Did you guys look at either sort of course assignment level or teaching use cases for LibGuides? Or guides, I should say, subject guides?
We do have course guides. They are designed a little bit differently and didn't have a lot of the same problems that subject guides do. However, when we presented the design to staff, a lot of them came up to me afterwards, can I do this with my course guides? Can you make my course guides look like this? Well, we'll see how the design goes for this term, and then we're going to reassess. But yeah, I think we'd have to look at, staff use those very differently. And I think we have to do some more user research with students as well before we would wholesale go. It's not like, yeah, absolutely, slap this puppy on a different kind of guide. So we'll see. We will see.
Another question?
It's late. It's the end of the day.
Yeah. Oh, we've got one.
So, what I have been saying to our subject librarians when they were building subject guides is almost exactly the same as what you were saying. I was a little bit more concrete. I was saying it was 10 o'clock on Sunday night. And I still got resistance. And it was really interesting. In certain disciplines, the subject librarians told me that, well, I'm not building the subject guide for the students, I'm building it for researchers or faculty who are trying to find stuff. I've started hearing less of that now that we've got the chat reference service in Ontario, so that people are starting to see that faculty members are coming out to chat at 9 o'clock at night, because that's when they're working too. How did you get a lot of resistance to this? It's students have poor time. It's basically you're saying students have poor time management. Let's be blunt, because it's like I am. Did you get much resistance to that characterization of your user community?
No, I think because that was specific to the quick guide, and the resistance I was expecting to the quick guide was that is not what, I can't possibly fit everything in because the faculty member doesn't want that. Because when we asked people about their target audience, we would hear, oh, it's from first years to faculty. And I would say that is not a target audience. So, and we have the detailed guide that can be for everybody else. Honestly, the research assignment thing was a little bit of hyperbole because I also knew that they would say, well, if a student has a research project, they should come and talk to us, right? And they can't always. So that was just a concrete way of saying, without saying, not everybody's going to come and talk to you. Not everybody can come and talk to you because they're going to work at different times. And what I didn't hear a lot of pushback, but I think having that second guide, so it's aimed at them, but it's open to everybody. We did have some conversation about whether that should just be on the intranet, if it's for their use, like if it's for their teaching, if it's for colleagues at the reference desk, should it just be on the intranet? But then, of course, they're putting in the work anyway, so we might as well make it public for people who might find it useful. Does that answer?
It's 5 after 4. My ears have been burning for the last 20 minutes. I'm one of those wall of words subject liaisons.
It's okay.
Who does it? Thank you, Shelley. This has been very interesting. Please help me to thank Shelley for this session.